Hi everyone, and welcome to Shelter Harbor Golf Club's cooking classes. And today we're going to do marinara and meatballs. We're going to start the marinara first because one of the ingredients that's actually in the meatballs is marinara. When we make marinara, it's one of those dishes that's a simple dish and it's a short list of ingredients. Whenever you do things with a short list of ingredients, it's important that all the ingredients are good. This is basically the marinara that they use in the movie Goodfellas that you might remember when they're slicing the garlic thin with the razor blades. And if you are not able to slice the garlic thin with a knife like this, you can use a Chinese mandolin, which is like 10 bucks, maybe less, from one of those Chinese groceries, and you slide it right along. I find that when you use quite a bit of garlic, it works out just fine because by the time it cooks a long time in the olive oil and then in the tomato sauce, it winds up tasting really good. So we've got our garlic sliced thin. We're going to turn on our burner and we're going to go with some olive oil. I'm going to say that was around 4 ounces of olive oil, but I'll give you a recipe. And the reason it's a lot of olive oil is it's not just to saute the garlic in. You want the garlic to perfume the whole body of olive oil, and then that olive oil will emulsify in with the tomatoes and wind up tasting really good. In this case, you don't really have to wait for the olive oil to get hot to put the garlic in because the garlic is going to do a nice little simmer in there for a few minutes. One of the things we'll talk about while our garlic is going is the tomatoes. These are plum tomatoes that are whole and peeled. You'll always see in the grocery store, you can get tomato puree, you can get diced tomatoes. The highest quality tomatoes will always be the whole peeled plum tomatoes. Also, these are the San Marzano plum tomatoes. There are a lot of brands that have them. The San Marzano plum tomatoes are grown in really good soil in Italy, and that's part of what makes the tomatoes so good. But another thing that makes the tomatoes so good is the fact that they're not packed in a lot of citric acid. We're just trying to keep it from getting so hot that it burns. So sort of a nice medium-low heat will work well for us. When you think the garlic's done, as long as it's not really starting to brown, go just a little further. It winds up performing a little better on the more cooked side than on the less cooked side. As it browns slightly, it'll start to actually get a little bit sticky and stick to your spoon too. That's another sort of telling tale. And now we're going to go in with the tomatoes, which will stop the cooking so this garlic is not getting away from us. And the other one. It's a good-sized batch of marinara, partly because, and I'm going to turn the flame off for a second, we need enough marinara to make the meatballs and enough marinara to cook the meatballs in, and then enough marinara left to sauce whatever pasta you're going to make with your marinara. So whenever you do a big batch of meatballs, you're always surprised by how much marinara you have to make. So now, don't worry, this won't be hot. You can actually pre-crush your tomatoes, but I just squish them by hand. I find that when you puree them in a blender, I don't like the way it comes out as well. It's just sort of too pureed. So if you just go in here and squish them by hand, each and every one. They don't have to be perfect. Okay, so all the tomatoes are crushed, which, like I say, if you didn't want to reach into the hot pot, you can pre-crush your tomatoes, but I just wanted you to see them whole. And our burner's going. We're going to go on a nice medium flame. Only takes around 45 minutes, maybe an hour tops. Part of that is because the tomatoes were of nice high quality, and we don't really have to cook a lot of acidity out. And all this marinara we'll need at the end is a little bit of basil, which works really well if you hand tear it. And then you'll check it for salt and pepper. In the meantime, we'll start our meatballs. And we have about 2.5 pounds of ground beef. And then we have a lot of little goodies that are going to make the meatballs good. What we're trying to do with meatballs is make it nice and tender. Like a meatloaf, we need to have some fillers to sort of fluff up in between the meat so that even when the meat's fully cooked, it'll still be super tender. We want those fillers to taste good. So I always use a little milk. This is probably going to be around 4 ounces of milk. This is 3 eggs. I use about an egg per pound. I'm going to use, this is 2 cups of cubed white bread, 1/2 cup of panko breadcrumbs, And I got some Parmesan here, probably about a half a cup of Parmesan. A good healthy hit of salt. This is probably about a teaspoon of salt and a pinch of pepper. And the reason that we want the salt to be so healthy is we're not just salting this little white mixture here. We're actually making enough salt for the whole 2.5 pounds of meat. So this mixture here has to be almost offensively salty. So all the ingredients are in here now, and it looks like a little milky, soupy business. And I said I put about a teaspoon of salt. I just gave it a taste, and I want maybe another quarter teaspoon of salt, another pinch of pepper. Okay, now the milk mixture is going to get a little bit of our marinara, and it's okay that our marinara is not totally done because it's still quite good enough marinara. And we're going to start adding some of the fully seasoned, ready-to-go mixture to our meat. And you don't add it all because you're trying to see how much of that mixture the meat will take. And if you go too far, you make the meat too loose and you're not able to make a meatball out of it. Meantime, our marinara that we're actually going to cook the meatballs in is going along nicely. I'm going to go a little bit more. And I hardly ever wind up using all of it. All the ways you can do this, your hands are the best. We'll form some meatballs. All right, so now we have the meatballs. This is actually only about maybe a little bit less than half the meatballs. So you get a nice sized batch out of 2.5 pounds, but it's certainly enough to show you. I'm just going to scooch the marinara over to the other burner and get our little saute pan here. And I've got it up nice and high. A little bit of olive oil. I'm going to let that pan get nice and hot. Meantime, we're peeking at our marinara, which is coming along nicely. You can turn that down a bit. You want it to be simmering in a nice sort of lively way, but not splattering all over your kitchen. So a nice medium-low, even low flame once it's going. Okay. It is important that this pan be nice and hot or these meatballs will stick on you. We're just going to put a little sear on all these meatballs. And you can see that they are nice and soft. They're about as soft as they could be, and that'll make a really nice tender meatball. If I made them any softer, I really wouldn't be able to work with them. So we're going to be patient and wait for a little bit of a sear. And a real trick here when you're searing a gentle item like this is you can't touch them too soon. If you try and touch them too soon, they might want to stick on you. Everything's doing fine. Sometimes I'll just tilt the pan and make sure the oil's getting there into all the little nooks and crannies of that side. You really won't be able to sear a meatball on all sides because it's round. But usually you can sear a meatball on at least 2 sides and often 3 sides, and that's about as good as you can do. Roll that one over. Roll that one over. You can see they're all browning up nicely. It's always just a little bit easier the second side once it gets started because they're starting to firm up just a little bit. That one's fine. Sometimes if there's a big fat one, it really needs to get hit on a third corner. All the sear does is sets them up a little bit so they're ready to hold their shape. I'm just going to go in with these last 3. You notice that I decided not to overcrowd the pan on that first go. You can only do so many at a time. Okay, so now we have our batch of meatballs seared, and we're just going to cover them in some of our marinara. And this is why when I said it really takes a lot of marinara. They can have maybe just a little bit of their heads peeking out the top, but not much more than that. Okay, so the last step with our meatballs, which are now covered in sauce, is we're just going to cover the pan with a little foil, and we're going to put it in a 350 oven covered for about 40 minutes. That was with the marinara being hot, the meatballs being recently seared, around 40 minutes, maybe as long as 50 minutes. If you were working with cold marinara or something like that, it would take a lot longer, like another 15 or 20 minutes. You could also transfer the meatballs to like a casserole style pan if you're more comfortable, anything that's safe for the oven. And the marinara, the tomatoes have broken down just by sort of stirring them a bit here and there. The little pieces of tomatoes that were too chunky are now broken down. I seasoned it already with a little salt and pepper, a little more. And then some basil at the very end. Leafy herbs like basil and Italian parsley go at the end because they're delicate. And all woody herbs like thyme and rosemary go in the beginning because that'll help tender them up. And that will be ready to go. I'll just slide it into this bowl so you can get a little visual on it. And we have some marinara. And in a short while, the meatballs will be done, and I'll show those to you as well. All right, so we just went and got the meatballs out of the oven. I'm going to take one out, put it on the board, just give it a little test, and it looks just beautiful. They are ready to go. So then we're going to take them and put them in the bowl. And usually the marinara that you actually cook the meatballs in is pretty good. I'll use some of it with the pasta sometimes, but I won't use all of it because it'll be a little bit greasy from the meatballs. That's why it's always nice to have a really nice batch of marinara that's untouched. And there we have it.